basically that is there in front, it has got two connotations. The first connotation is the building block, as in building a structure on a foundation. And the second block is the block that comes in the way of success. So you could look at block on either way. And when we focus on the blocks of our strategy today, we'll be talking about both. What are the blocks that you can use constructively? And what are the blocks that we need to shake off in our minds and in our thinkings and in our kind of working to make our strategies work in the marketplace? So let me begin by asking each and every one of our viewers a question. What is the strategy of your organization? Or if not organization, pick up any one big brand in your company. Can you articulate in about 35 words what is the strategy of your organization or of any of your major brands? Now, some time back, I read an article in which there was a survey conducted by Harvard Business, who interviewed a lot of executives in different organizations. And when they asked this question to the executives, and these are all, mind you, top executives in very successful companies, when this question was put to these executives, very few of them could articulate the strategy very clearly. So most of them actually did not know what the strategy of their organization was. And mind you, as I said, they were top executives in very successful companies. So this is a question for each and every one of you. Now let me go one step further. What if this question is put across to all your colleagues in your organization? Not only the sales force, but also if we ask this question to people in HR or in training, or if I ask this question to the medical teams or the production teams or the finance teams or the IT teams, across functions, we put the same question across. What is the strategy of your organization or major brands? Now here again, you will see that very few people are aware, and even those who are aware are not consistent either in their articulation or understanding of what the strategy is. So there's a wide variance in interpretation from one person to the other, and you will get multiple connotations of what they think the strategy is. Now, this really is a great problem. And remember, strategies are not created overnight. There's a lot of voluminous work in terms of data, in terms of voluminous content, presentations, vetting out, and validation that goes into finalization of a strategy. And once there are inconsistencies in the interpretation and articulation, it can create a lot of confusion in an organization. And this is one of the blocks that we should shake off, try to construct the building blocks. Take, for example, there's a very enthusiastic young executive in an organization who wants to make a difference to his work. He takes up a project with his boss and works on that project with a lot of intensity and passion, only to realize 3 months down the line or 6 months down the line, when he goes higher up with that idea, it's told to him that it doesn't fit into the strategy. Now, if this person was at the same wavelength as those of the higher ups in terms of clearly understanding what the organization's strategy is, this time that was wasted could be used constructively to work towards the strategy and to ensure that we make the building blocks of success out of it. But this doesn't happen in such kind of cases. Or take the case when one department is disconnected from the other department. The USP of the sales force and the marketing team on a product is that we have very quick turnaround times. But the production team is investing in equipment that can endure long production runs. Now, both these actions or philosophies or thoughts are in conflict, and they are a different direction and not consistent with the organization's strategy. Now, all this could be avoided if that voluminous chunk of data of strategy is articulated very clearly in a simple strategy statement in around 35 words which is shared across the organization so that everybody is very clear in terms of their interpretation, comprehension, understanding, and work towards making that strategy work. So, according to this article from the Harvard Business, it is important to define your overall strategy in a very clear and succinct strategy statement, not more than 35 words, which is well understood across the length and breadth of the organization. So let us understand what are the basic elements of a key strategy statement. First of all, we realize the importance that for a common interpretation, we need to have a strategy statement. In order to have a good strategy statement, what should be the critical components? The first thing that a strategy statement must have is an objective. Today, why you're creating the strategy? Because you're at point A and you want to move to point B. So you have to be very clear in your definition of what that point B is. So where you want to be, what do you want to achieve, and the timeline by which you want to achieve. You all heard of creating SMART objectives. So specific, measurable, achievable, reasonable, relevant, and they should be time bound. So this is what goes into creation of a SMART objective. Now, don't be confused with what does achievable mean. Achievable doesn't mean that something which is easy to achieve, and that is what most of us, commonly interpret. Why? Even if you take an ambitious objective, you must have a plan to achieve that objective, and that is how you make it look achievable. You give the confidence to yourself and to your teams that you have it in you to make the strategy work and achieve the ambition. So achievable does not mean something which is easily within my grip or which is easily within my grasp. Even if I set a very high ambition for myself, I know what it takes to create a roadmap to achieve that ambition. So the objective should be very clearly stated in your strategy statement, and the objective should be a SMART objective. The second thing which is very important is the scope, which is the domain in which you are going to operate. Now, if your core competency is in specific therapeutic areas, like say, if I'm in specialty care, and if my strength area is in cardio or in diabetes, then should I really take a call in moving towards super specialty areas, getting into very high-end transplant or in oncology areas, and thereby you run the risk of diluting your focus by moving away from your core competence. So the scope actually tells you the boundaries in which you're going to operate. And part of your strategy, a very intrinsic part of your strategy, is the definition and the articulation of your choices. What are the choices you are going to make? The choices could be in the choice of your customer, which type of customers you're going to target. Maybe some organizations may say that I will target the younger target audience, and the ones who are very, very senior, I might not give as much focus. That's a choice you are making. And this choice comes from your past successes. So in scope, you define your domain, which is the choices in which you're going to base your strategy. So choices could be in the form of customer. It could also be in the form of the product portfolio in which you operate. Now, if you're strong in certain areas, should you try to diversify and break out of your strength areas and move into other areas where you've not really tested your potential? You run the risk of diluting your resources. You run the risk of dissipating the focus and the energy of the field force. And you run the risk of taking a lot of time to establish yourself in an untested area. Now, if an organization feels that they don't have the capability to do all this, fair enough, you define your boundaries. Because strategy doesn't mean knowing what to do, but the wisdom in driving a strategy is also to know what not to do. You've got to be extremely clear on that. So what not to do is as important as where you will focus your energy and your resources on. So this all fits into the scope, which is the domain of where you are going to operate. The third angle of the triangle is something which is most important, your competitive advantage. This is the reason of your existence. This is the reason for which a doctor will prefer to choose you as a partner of choice as opposed to any other company in that particular therapeutic area. And this becomes all the more important in very hyper competitive branded generic markets. And we are all used to it. So once again, as part of your scope, you may make a choice in terms of your competitive advantage. Would you like to park along the short-term route of taking care of your customer, managing them, putting one-to-one resources on them and building them? Or would you want to focus on a very scientific aspect? It may be your strength. The external environment or the customers, they relate to you as a very strong scientific company. Do you really want to build up on that? Do you want to create valuable scientific properties that add value to the customer, which would take care of their unmet medical needs, that would help them to manage patients better than how they are currently managing, improve outcomes and save lives? Well, if customers perceive you in that direction, then the relationship that you build is more value-based and therefore more sustainable. But if you embark on a very short-term transactional means of customer engagement, there is no end to it. Today, you have a stimulus to elicit a response from the doctor. Tomorrow, your competitor will go higher up than you, and then you would have lost the customer. Has it not happened to us? Right? It has happened to us many times. And therefore, then your stimulus has only got to be one step higher in order to perpetuate that equity of your customer. So all this gets very transactional, it's very short term, and it's non-sustainable. So when you create a competitive advantage, make sure that your competitive advantage is something that is sustainable and gives you value in the long run. Now, the essence of competitive advantage is basically finding that sweet spot, which is an intersection between what the customers need and what your capabilities are, which is better than your competition within the regulatory framework in which you operate. So as you know, in our environment, we are governed by a regulatory framework. There are certain do's, how you can interact with your customers, and there are clear don'ts in which you can't interact in a certain way with the customers, in which there is a risk of incurring not only a penalty, but incurring even a loss of repute for an organization that it least wants in such difficult times. So how do I find that sweet spot between the need of the customer and between my offerings or my capability? Now, at this point in time, I would like to share with you an example in one of my previous companies in which we identified a sweet spot that intersected beautifully between what the customer wanted and what we were offering to the customer. And I understand that it was better, with all respect and humility, it was better than what the competition did, and which helped us to achieve our objective. So first thing, coming to the objective. Now, our objective, we were number 2 in the therapy area of angina. You know, angina is nothing but chest pain or ischemic heart disease, as you call it. So we were in area of chronic stable angina. We were number 2 in angina. And we said that by the end of the year, let's be number 1. Come on, let's do what it takes. So in one of my conversations with one of the top opinion leaders from Mumbai, who's one of the topmost cardiologists of the country, I casually asked him, you know, sir, today, what do you think is the need of doctors in the area of angina? And what do you think a company like ours can do to take care of those needs? It was a very casual conversation with him. And the first thing that he instantly told me, you know, the problem with angina is that more often than not, it is misdiagnosed. So we need to educate our primary physicians on what are the signs and symptoms and how do you recognize angina before misdiagnosing it or passing it off as a muscular pain or a gas or an indigestion. So one of the biggest problems in our country today is diagnosis. And if you could do something, you know, to help the diagnosis, that could really solve a lot of these problems. Now, this is one point that we picked up. And then our marketing team and our medical team did a lot of research on the prevalence of angina and what are the problems of angina in India. And we went through a lot of articles. And clearly, these articles corroborated what that opinion leader said. So we got data which shows that almost 50% of angina in a country is not diagnosed. And the second thing, and then the marketing team moved out in different directions and they started interacting with more and more opinion leaders. The second thing that came out is that, once you treat a patient of angina, we do not have any clinical tools which can tell us how the patient is progressing over a period of time. Now, one of the problems with angina is that, the patient's lifestyle is compromised. And very often that is psychological. Say a patient is very fond of swimming or playing badminton. And then if he lands up with angina and he recovers also and he's on treatment and medication, you might have a lot of apprehension in his or her mind when he plays badminton again or when they think of going for swimming again. So the quality of life is impacted. And the kind of work that you were doing earlier, you may not be able to do it with the same rigor and intensity. But there was no way of finding out how the patient is progressing over a period of time. Whether with certain higher intensity of activity, is the patient able to tolerate it for more durations? So these tools were lacking. And then we realized that not only diagnosis, but even prognosis of the disease was a particular problem. And we created an advisory board where the same top cardiologist was the chairman of the steering committee. We had a steering committee of 13 top opinion leaders of the country. This doctor was the chairman, and we had another 12 doctors across the country. We looked at the international guidelines, and we looked at how we could adapt these guidelines in the Indian context and how we could create tools digitally that would help the doctors to diagnose through a simple checklist. And the checklist was nothing but very simple questions which the patient had to tick, and there were scores. And based on the scores, the physician or the GP would definitely get a clinical suspicion of angina, for which he could then refer the patient to a specialized cardiac care for further treatment. So that was one thing that we started doing, and we started creating a lot of educational programs. So this national steering committee, we broke it down into regional steering committee of more than 100 top opinion leaders at the regional level. These were the regional opinion leaders. And from the regional opinion leaders, we cascaded down the line to the end users. And we created digital tools, which was a diagnostic checklist and a prognostic checklist. So these were not done earlier. These were the needs. We identified the needs. We came out with an offering which got integrated into the ethos of clinical practice of managing patients. And it really helped us, to build some kind of attraction with these doctors. And lo and behold, by the end of the year, we moved out from number 2 to number 1 position. So we started by defining our objective, which was to move from number 2 to number 1. Our scope was very clear. We would have an in-clinic and out-clinic scientific engagement with the customers. And we looked at what the competition was doing and what was not being done by the competition, and found a sweet spot between our offering and our capability and the need of the doctor. So friends, the most important aspect of your strategy is to define your value proposition or your competitive advantage. What is it that you are going to do better than your competitor? And this is the very essence of the foundation on which you are going to build customer preferences. Customer preferences can even come from short-term transactional means of engagement. But if you want to really build long-term sustainable practices, you've got to find that sweet spot between the need of your customer and your capability. And this requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of thinking. It takes time to build up, but once you do it and you measure its progress, you can see how you can make it work.